Apple's Motion is so fully integrated with Final Cut Pro that all of Final Cut's plugins are contained in a folder called Motion Templates. And that folder exists even if you don't own the Motion application. This video will show you how to modify Final Cut's plugins so that they look different and unique to you. Why, you may ask, is there a need to modify an already good-looking plugin? The answer is simply that you can personalize plugins to make them look like your own work, rather than something that's been created by someone else. And I'd strongly urge you to purchase Motion, as it not only allows you to personalize your plugins, but it allows you to create your own digital animations that can be used within and independently of Final Cut. Motion's available from the Apple Store, and unlike Final Cut Pro, it doesn't have a trial version, but for $50, it's the best value software I know. There's a minor difference between plugins provided as part of Final Cut Pro, and these are known as the default plugins, and third-party plugins that have been added to Final Cut Pro after the purchase of the application. Default plugins are embedded in Final Cut's application and hidden from you, whereas third-party plugins are in a separate folder on your system that you do have access to. Most of the default plugins provided as part of the package of Final Cut Pro only have the ability to change colors, fonts, and some basic functionality. Purchase plugins do offer much more modification. But for this example, I'll show you how to modify the default dramatic title plugin from its standard 3 text animation to add a 4th text animation with an optional colored background that can be disabled and with a fade out of that 4th animated word. For the dramatic title, the inspector shows only the font color and reflections can be changed. The default dramatic title plugin shows in Final Cut's title browser, and it's locked by Final Cut, so you can't change the title, but you can change a copy. The process to modify the dramatic title starts by right-clicking on the title in the title browser and selecting Open a copy in Motion. If you own Motion, it'll be launched with the dramatic title open in the project panel. The Motion interface has a similar color theme to Final Cut Pro. The default view has 5 panels. The left panel shows either the library or the inspector, and the inspector is similar in functionality to what Final Cut Pro's inspector offers. The library contains media and objects that can be used in Motion. The next panel to the right is the project panel. This contains objects dragged from the library or behaviors that you've added, which are actions that animate those objects. Below the project panel is the timeline sidebar, and this is duplicating everything in the project panel, and it's purely there for convenient access when you're working in the timeline. You can select either the project panel or the sidebar for any of those actions or objects. The timeline is the panel to the right of the sidebar. The 5th panel at the top right is the viewer. And as you've seen, the dramatic title contains 3 animated words. In this exercise, we're going to add a 4th word with the same animations as the original 3. One of the main concepts of Motion is that objects are contained in groups. And when an action is added to a group, it affects all the objects in the group. And when an action is added to an individual object, only that object is affected. And this is similar in concept to a compound clip in Final Cut Pro. In Motion, there must at least be one group, whether you've got one object or more. With the original dramatic title, there is only one group, and this is a little unusual as plugins in Motion tend to have several groups, and you'll see later on how to add another group as we progress. The group for the dramatic title has been named Main, and all objects in the project panel can be renamed to suit your needs. Groups can be opened or exposed with the exposure triangle. As I've said, the dramatic title has 3 words: title, subtitle, and date. and they can be changed in the project panel or in the inspector to the left. I've changed the word date in the project panel to third text and also changed it at the bottom left in the inspector, and that's when the text tab at the top of the inspector is selected. When you change any text attributes in Motion, they become the default text when you save the plugin for Final Cut Pro, but they can be modified in Final Cut Pro. One of the key things to remember about Motion plugins when you're using them in Final Cut is that in order to be able to modify the plugin, you need to publish the option in Motion. Otherwise, it's fixed at what you set in Motion, and you'll not be able to modify it when using Final Cut. And there's an exception to that rule. The option to modify text is always on by default, but you can have it disabled in Motion. It's when editable in FCP is unticked that text options will not be modifiable in Final Cut Pro. Since the plan for this exercise is to add a fourth text animation, I'll change the date text. To provide space for the fourth animation that we're planning, the duration of the project needs to be increased. The dramatic title has a default of 9 seconds, and you can see that by selecting the Edit menu and selecting Project Properties. Change the duration to 12 seconds. The timecode duration view can be changed to seconds or show in timecode. To be able to view the whole project in the timeline now, press the Shift+Z to fit in window, and that's the same command as for Final Cut Pro. To allow space for that fourth text animation, you'll need to shorten the duration of the third text by dragging the top third text track from the white end triangle at the 12-second mark to the 9-second mark. And be careful not to drag the main track, as that will shorten the whole project. Select and highlight the third text in the project panel. It'll turn blue. Copy with Command C. When you copy a heading, in this case the heading is third text, you'll also copy all of the behaviors associated with that heading. The gear logo within the heading enables and disables all of the behaviors associated with that heading. The blue check marks enable and disable each line in the project panel. In the timeline, place the playhead at the 8-second mark and paste Command V. Change the third text copy to fourth text in both the project heading and in the inspector. And you may need to extend the length of the lighter blue fourth text top track in the timeline to the white end triangle. And be careful, this is a tip. Whenever you paste or insert an object in the timeline, it'll always be inserted at the position of the playhead. So we've done all we need to do for that fourth animation, but let's add a couple of extras so you become more familiar with the features of Motion. I'll add a fade out of that fourth text word as a behavior, and also add a background that can be disabled in Final Cut Pro if needed. To add the fade out behavior, select the fourth text heading, and from the Behaviors Gear logo button at the top of the screen, select Basic Motion, Fade In, Fade Out. You'll see that the Fade In, Fade Out behavior has been added to the project panel. The inspector should open with the blue Behaviors tab showing in the Fade In, Fade Out controls. Slide the Fade In time to 0 and leave the Fade Out at 12. It'd be nice to be able to control the length or to be able to disable the fade out when you're using the plugin within Final Cut Pro. To enable that functionality, Motion provides the option to publish the controls so that they will show in Final Cut Pro's Inspectors window. To the right of the line labelled Fade Out Time is a downward chevron that can be clicked and shows the option to publish. The final extra is to provide a background that can be optionally disabled in Final Cut Pro's Inspector. Move the playhead in the timeline to the beginning of the project. From the Object menu, select New Group. New objects are always added at the top of the project panel. under that main group heading. So drag the new group down to below the title heading and change the name to background. You'll see that as you drag it down, a little blue line will show where you're going to insert it. With the background group highlighted, select the rectangle tool in the center of the screen. The tool icon will turn blue when selected. Draw a rectangle to fill the viewer. In the inspector, with the Shape tab selected, that will show as blue as you selected. Change the color of Fill Color. To the right of the Fill heading, select the downward chevron next to the word Hide and select Publish. To the right of each of Fill Color and Fill Opacity, select the downward chevron and select Publish. The plugin's just about ready to be saved, but first you need to check which controls will show in Final Cut Pro's Inspector. Select the project heading at the top of the project panel. With the project tab showing blue selected in the inspector, you'll see how the controls will appear in Final Cut Pro. If there are controls that you don't want to be in Final Cut, you can unpublish them by selecting the chevron to the right. Or if controls are missing, you'll need to go back and check that you published them earlier. Unpublish Graphics HDR, and you can also reorder and change the names in the options. Change the name of Fade Out Time to Fade Out Fourth Text. Drag Fill Color above Fill and change the name of Fill to Fill On and Off. All that's left to do now is save the project, and at the very top of the screen you'll see that the project is titled dramatic.copy.moti. It's a copy because you're not able to change the default plugins that ship with Final Cut Pro, as mentioned earlier. And this is a blessing in disguise, as it stops you overwriting the original plugin. And you'll be able to see later that third-party plugins can be overwritten, so you do need to be careful with those. Select the File menu, select Save, or if you want to have a different name, select Save As. Give the plugin a name under the template name. Select the category where the original was located. Don't worry about the theme. And if you modify an existing title, it's a good idea to keep the name and add any difference at the end. And you would include unused media if you'd use photos or videos in the project. Press Publish. When you open Final Cut Pro, you'll see the modified plugin when you open the title category that you saved it in. Drag the new title into the timeline and check the inspector. The controls are the same as you published in Motion. Now let's compare the controls of the original and that new plugin that we've just created. Now I'll show you how to modify third-party plugins because they're just a little bit different. There are free and purchasable third-party plugins. They can be just as modifiable as the default plugins, with the minor difference they may be changed directly and are then overwritten without making a copy, as with the default plugins. You'll also find that most plugins that you purchase will be locked by the developer, so they aren't able to be modified or even make a copy. And you'll see the difference when you right-click on the third-party plugin as whether it can be modified or not. When you select the option to open in Motion, you'll see a warning. If the plugin is able to be opened, it will immediately show in the Motion interface without showing that locked message. After you've made your changes to a third-party plugin, when you try to save those changes, you will be presented with a Save as Duplicate message. Apple Motion's well worth the $50 to be able to make plugins look like something a little different and to change them for extra functionality, like that extra text animation as you've just seen. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Make sure you press the bell to be notified about new videos about Apple Motion. Thanks for watching.